Welcome back to another episode of Telling Assorted Life Lessons. That is the Telling All podcast with Juan Rodriguez. Thanks for joining me for what is now the third week in a row. Bit of a triumph. Bit of a triumvirate experience, if you will. I'd like to begin this episode a little differently. The title of this episode is going to be called Art and Arcs. Both of those are going to be acronyms. For those of you that may not already be aware, acronyms are words that have letters that each mean something, much like the title of the podcast. All means assorted life lessons. That's A.L.L. ART and ARC will both have separate meanings aside from your typical understanding of art. Being, paintings, video games, music. Literature. Speaking itself can be an art form as well. Arcs are typically like, ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Those are two golden arcs, for example. You can arrange those lamps behind me to give you arcs of light. Arcs are also something in storytelling that let you know exactly how far a character has come, so to speak. And I do very much enjoy a good character arc. One of the books that I've read on creating character arcs in writing breaks them down into three separate types. If I recall correctly, you have your positive, negative, and neutral character arcs. Your positive character arc would have somebody starting at A and ending off better than they were at the beginning of the story. Your negative character arc would be the inverse to that, which is to say the opposite. Someone ending the story off worse than when they began. We all know those movies. And your neutral character arcs can be boring when it comes to things like shonen for some people, but I actually enjoy those very much because a neutral character arc has someone being who they were all along, all throughout the story, perhaps still ending off better or with a better understanding of themselves, but typically I enjoy the neutral character arc because the best qualities of the individual shine through from start to finish, and you get a deeper understanding of why they are the main character, so to speak. Main character syndrome is something that has been made readily available to the masses, it seems, in my humble opinion. These days. You grow up with those types who think they are the center of the universe and they never quite grow out of it, and you pray that they do, but as they say, it's in God's hands. With that being said, I believe when it comes to my personal story, I have a bit of column A, column C, so to speak. I have a positive character arc, undoubtedly. But I would like to make a case that perhaps it was a neutral character arc that was only made positive because I was under the impression that I started off with one arm and one leg tied behind my back at the beginning of this race. Allow me to elaborate on what I mean. You do the best you can with the information you have. I'm sure that's not something I made up on the spot. There's probably a more eloquent way to put that. But simply put, when people make mistakes, they often beat themselves up because they somehow think that what they know now on the other side of that experience somehow should have dictated how they behaved in the past. My saying that I coined is, I don't like to beat myself up just because I think I know better now. I hope I can elaborate a little better on that sentiment, but simply put, you do the best you can with the information you have. And if you don't have all the information, which is virtually impossible, right? Because hindsight is, in fact, 2020. It's a little difficult to get through these situations and navigate accordingly, according to your character as an individual, if you will. Now, vagaries aside, all I mean is, hey, you touch the stove, you find out it's hot, you don't touch it again, right? You learn some things the hard way. Some things you learn by other people trying to save you and giving you a bit of wisdom. Sometimes you learn them by banging your head against the wall until you figure out, oh my goodness, it just feels so good when I stop. And then realize maybe I shouldn't have been doing such a self-destructive habit to begin with. A bit all over the place in this intro. It's a little later than my normal record time, but I figured it was pertinent. And I figured that I could transfigure, that is to say, turn one feeling into another, and just elaborate. So for me, I'm grateful for art because it's taught me a lot of these lessons. Simply put, we as outside viewers of the experience of a lot of main characters sometimes get information that the main characters in these stories don't have. So we might be able to tell where things are going to go or how they might go down, but in the context of the story, you kind of get tunnel vision in certain scenarios. And when people are willfully holding information from the main character or myself in this story, you can't always move to the best of your ability if you don't know what you're avoiding or what you're walking into, whether that be a den of vipers, a pitfall, or a trap, or just a lovely evening in some cases. You know, you overanalyze because you're trying to account for all the variables. So simply put, sometimes it's best to just go with the flow. Put your best foot forward, lead with love, and wish everyone nothing but the best. It's a little difficult to do when you're a teenager. For example, in some of the young adult literature or movies, you have people with really big feelings trying to make sense of the world from their limited perspective. They don't have all the experience that some adults do. The inverse of that is, if you have a teenager that's an avid reader, that has lived hundreds, if not thousands of lifetimes through the art form of literature, you gain experience and wisdom about situations you might not have any real world basis for. But what happens is, when you have someone very young in years trying to counsel someone that's much older, egos collide, because what the fuck do you know, kid? Am I right? I don't care if I'm right. I'm happy, and that's what's important. We have a choice to make in these scenarios. You can be happy, or you can be right. Too often in my life, I've been right about certain things, and I wasn't all too happy. Just want to let that sink in for a second. Don't know if anybody can relate. I imagine you can. Whether that be a friendship or a family relationship or an outcome to a scenario you couldn't possibly have predicted. You don't want to be right about the negativity you might encounter or the consequences of some actions, but through some or no fault of your own, the ends justify the means, or the means justify the ends. The overanalyzing proves fruitful in ways that you had hoped it would not be. I'm recording this episode, for those who are watching, with a bit of different lighting. I like to play with light and shadow, both in my environment and in my metaphors. There's often a duality to the way that I speak. Touching back to last week's episodes with contradictions, you touch on two extremes and hope that some people can pick up what you're putting down. All that to say that growing up, I was often that young person who had a bit of information that they shouldn't have simply because they were pretty well read for their age. And recently, I've encountered some beautiful people from my past and realized that being the bigger person is a silly sentiment, because it is something that is detached entirely from age, sometimes experience, sometimes circumstance. You can be the bigger person all you want in life, but I find that that can be the source of resentment in a lot of cases. A resentment that can lead to a deep-seated depression. Misusing your power, misusing your influence from a place of hurt and angst, when really you don't know a damn thing. You only know what you were told, and you weren't told everything, especially if you're just parroting information that you've been told over and over and over. And it's fascinating to me that there are people in this world, whether they be at your workplace, at family events, or just out at the grocery store, who don't seem to learn valuable life lessons. And that's in part why I seem to be doing this podcast. I'm almost cataloging the lessons and the origins, and I'm not sharing the origins, just the meat and potatoes, the nugget of truth out of these lessons, because quite literally, I don't think anyone wants to sit here and listen to my life story. But I'm glad you're tuned in anyway. And I love you all for taking the time out of your days to just follow me along while I work these things out. But simply put, there are some people in this world that just never grow the fuck up. And I love that for them. Because as long as you maintain a childish mindset and you refuse accountability and you point fingers at others for the misgivings of your lives or the lives of your loved ones, you never know power. You never know your ability to change the circumstances around you or within your own mind. And I believe that is a superpower by today's society's terms. But I believe that is a power that every individual I've ever met is capable of attaining for themselves. Simply put, you can either get your ish together, or you can live long enough that your ish runs your worldview. I prefer the former. I like to get all my ish right up in a nice little spot, put it in a bag, take it down to the ish store and sell it. Get rid of it, pawn it, sprinkle it along so that it can be little ishy trees and someday grow into something beautiful to behold, something completely different, transfigured, if you will. Transubstantiation, turning one substance into another through some form of miracle, magic, or fire. Trial by fire, baptism by fire, makes no difference. It's just positive, negative, or neutral. And feedback for me is neutral. And feedback is something that I've received a lot of in the last, let's call it 24 hours. And realizing that despite being heightened for reasons outside of this podcast, I don't have to rise above. I just have to stand up straight. I just have to be who I am and who I was all along. Who I've been told I am. A kind, loving, and sweet man. It's a beautiful thing because you go out and you try to meet people with love, and then you're met with smiles where the eyes don't quite reflect. You're met with side glances, you're met with whispers, and none of that leaves a friggin' dent. And then you realize it's not your problem. It's not your character arc. But what I do love about arcs is the authentic reality check often present in these arcs. And the bigger person, so to speak, in most situations, doesn't often give the characters the authentic reality check necessary for growth, because you have to pick your battles. And something that I've learned in my life is, much like art, it's not for everyone. And you don't want to battle over art. And you want to pick your battles by people who are possessed by a certain type of art. That is to say, arrogance, resentment, and a timid nature, or a tired nature. That last letter is interchangeable, in my opinion. What I mean by that is, folks that like to hold their nose up at you and look down at you. I've encountered those people my entire life. They have resentment over things they know nothing about, or maybe things they have experienced as a matter of direct experience, or secondhand, or going back to those stories that you're told over and over. And that timid nature is in regards to the lions, to the people that stand tall, that walk proud, that don't fall victim to the muck. They don't have to rise above, because when you're standing tall and not on your back screaming at the sky, not much tends to get to you. And when it does, if you've done the work, you have coping skills, You understand your defense mechanisms and the others that you see in interactions. And that timid nature can cause some people to balloon up and puff themselves up like they're haughty, tawdy, and better than anyone else, when really they're just afraid. Or really, they're just afraid to look inward. Because then they'd have to address some misgivings that they might have. And when I call it tired nature, I mean it is old hat. I'm only 32. There are people twice my age that haven't changed much in my experience in the entire time that I've known them. And that can be all 32 years, or that can be an afternoon at a coffee shop. But when you don't take the time to learn from your mistakes, learn that there are two sides to every story, and in my case, there's a third side that's never actually been uttered but to a choice few, you realize you don't have all the information. You don't know the character arcs of those around you. You don't know just how far they've come. For me, in my youth, I was known as quite the angry young man. And looking from the outside, it was apparent that there was a lot of anger. But what you might not know is there was a source for that anger. And that source was a simple inability to express great pain or frustration at far too many people willingly misinterpreting my words or pretending that they wanted to listen and shouting me down every step of the way. And I'm grateful for those things because you choose, when you have enough experience, not to mince your words, to be blunt, to be softer with some people, to match people where they are. And you don't learn how to do that without a few fumbles, a few butt whoopings, a few black eyes, a few cracked ribs along the way. Those can be symbolic or they can be literal in my case. But the simple fact of the matter is, some people have never been punched in the face. Some people have never been beaten within an inch of their life. Some people have never been torn down with a verbal perspicacity unmatched, unrivaled in their lifetimes. And some people might call that sparing someone. I call that choosing your battles. Why would you waste your time trying to explain anything to someone with both hands covering their ears? Why would you try to waste your time when you don't have all the information, when you've been given the information way too late for you to actually formulate a strategy, a proper plan of approach? That's when we go back to the beginning and we simply be who we are. For me, I'm an open book. I'm a powerful voice in the dark or in the light, depending on where I happen to be. Often it's a bit of a liminal space for me. I kind of inhabit both sides of the equation. It's often a choice. And I am vulnerable by choice. I've got no armor on. At least not to the naked eye. But in choosing to continue my journey through this world, as I am, as I've always been, before the world started telling me all the reasons I shouldn't be, I've discovered something beautiful. People's natures are apparent as long as you're willing to look, study, hang out. Be in a den of vipers, so to speak. And somehow find the most beautiful things in that den, and they come to you. And they make it known that it's so lovely to see you, and they genuinely engage in conversation. And you realize that while it might be a den of vipers, there are other lions among you. Or in my case, bears. I happen to be a bear with the strength of two bears in my mind. But all of this to say that be careful when you are out and about in the world, because everyone is going through a battle of their own. You think you might be happening to go through it? I got news for you. Everybody is going through it in their own way. And it's how we show up that determines whether someone has a bad day, a horrible day, or if their day starts to get better. And over the course of the last 24 hours, I've gotten to be someone that has helped others. And that brings me a great sense of joy, if I'm being honest. Starting with a couple coworkers, a couple friends, family members, my wife, my dog, my birds, Choosing not to let the way I'm feeling affect the way I show up is the greatest gift I've ever received. Whether I gave that to myself or if I was reminded of my ability to do it all along, makes no difference to me, to be honest. I've had a wonderful day despite everything being thrown at me. Whether that be vibes or curveballs or changes of plans, it's just wonderful to know that there's love out there to be had, and I have plenty of love to give. And art and arcs are something I came up with on the car ride home this evening. And that's not a life lesson, but it's reminding me of all the life lessons attached to that. All the stories that I could share, but really I'm just trying to hammer a point home. If you encounter people that are arrogant, filled with resentment, and just tired of being around them, then remove yourself from the situation. What do you really have to gain from exposing yourself to these things? And if you can't give people around you an authentic reality check, why are you surrounding yourself with them? If you can't tell someone exactly how they've gone wrong, then you can't communicate with them. And if you can't communicate with someone, why do you have them around? I mean, even animals can communicate, and they're not exactly verbal. I mean, my birds are, but they're pretty limited in their speech. And I've discovered that some things are best left unsaid. Some things simply aren't worth hashing out. Some things in this world are just better left in the past. That goes for people. That goes for certain life lessons that shouldn't quite be shared. Hide your kids, hide your wife. All this to say that I've made peace with the fact that people change on their own time. In their own time. Over the course of many years, it's not something that happens, and it's not something that you can understand in a short conversation. Sometimes it is. Sometimes people grow and change in ways you can't fathom, but simply encountering you or something that makes them revert, regress, you tend to lose sight of who they are today because they're acting like someone they aren't anymore. And it's just a defense mechanism. Those people that walk around with their noses so high, pretending that they're better than everyone, in my experience, a lot of them are just scared, afraid, lonely, in need of reassurance. But who wants to reassure someone who's just so pompous, so arrogant? Then you have those people that are the opposite. They walk around like that, but the second you give them a genuine smile and say it's so good to see you see that ego deflate and you start to see the light. The light that I like to believe is in the vast majority of people, you see. And that light is something that I've had for a long time, that I've tried to hide. And I've had my own dealings with resentment. I've got plenty that I'm trying to let go. And I guess I can tell a little story from a few years ago at a coffee shop. Somewhere I would go often, and I was on a first name basis with the cashier. Cashiers, to be honest. And one morning, I was getting breakfast for my wife and I was saccharine sweet with my favorite cashier. Please, thank you kindly, that kind of thing. Because I was raised with manners. I was raised well, y'all. And the person behind me decides to just say what they're thinking and not so quietly say that that kind of nice is so fake. And I turned around and let that person know exactly how I felt, that this was just who I am, and I'm not even a morning person, but seeing this cashier and their associates always brightens my day. And they might be careful about how they speak about strangers who are directly in front of them, because they might catch someone on a bad day. In other words, I might be in control and I might be willing to let things slide, but too often in life, you fuck around and you find out. I'm guilty of that, that's for sure. Nice little piece of humble pie, both served to me and dished out. Not something I'm proud of, but I am proud of the lessons that I learned. Sometimes a little communication can heal a whole lot of misunderstanding. But again, we circle back to people who are willing to understand. You have to be able to identify when people are listening to understand, and when somebody's defensive or standoffish and simply listening to respond. And again, we'll go back to this smile that never quite reaches the eyes. It's a dead giveaway, folks. I invite you to keep an eye out for that in your daily lives going forward. And I don't know if I've told a cohesive narrative or tried to tie it all together with that last little story, but I'm a bit frazzled, and this is probably going to be the only time I can record this episode. So going forward, I'm going to be a little more careful with my time, making sure that I can get some quality content out to everyone. But I thank you all for taking this ride with me for sure. And while this is technically episode 3, because the first one was what we might call a formal introduction, and I will be having guests very soon. April seems to be a very busy month for me, and I'm loving every second of it. But the simple fact of the matter is, where there's a will, there's a way, and as of right now, I will have a guest next week, but that's only true until it isn't. So, art and arcs. What are some of your favorite character arcs in fiction, in real life, perhaps your own? What are some of your favorite works of art? That one back there is by an artist by the name of Create. He uses color and abstract. Paintings seem to speak to me. Perhaps you like comic books, Spider-Man and his Sinister Six, for example. Maybe you're more of a manga person. Maybe you just like a good telenovela. Please, if you haven't already, like and subscribe. If you've liked anything so far, please feel free to share it as far and wide as you can. And in any case, thank you very much for hearing me out. Thank you very much for tuning in and taking time out of your day. I hope I've been able to improve your day just a little bit, or give you some words for something you didn't have before. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Take care now. Bye-bye.